Good morning. Are you an innkeeper or are you a remodeler? Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, all glory and honor be unto you this morning and every morning. I ask that you would join us this morning, that you would bless us with your presence, and that your word would go forth. In thy Son's name, amen. So here we are, we're about halfway between Thanksgiving and Christmas. A couple days ago was actually the halfway point. It was just over 2 weeks ago was Thanksgiving, and just under 2 weeks from now is Christmas. And for some reason, that being the fact or the case, I struggled with coming up with a topic for this morning. I did teach Bible class the last couple weeks, so I can kind of try and blame that for a lack of inspiration. I was spending time focusing on that. Maybe it was just a fact that I was procrastinating. I don't know entirely. Nevertheless, I was having a little trouble. I was stuck on this idea of Thanksgiving has just happened and we had a Thanksgiving message and we're going to have a Christmas message in a couple weeks. I shouldn't do either of those. And for some reason, I just got stuck on what I shouldn't do rather than focusing on what I should. Thankfully, last Saturday, as I was finishing up my preparations for last Sunday's Bible class, I received a text from my cousin Marie. It was a simple text letting me know that Mike and Nicole had a special number that they had prepared, and they were asking if I would be willing to use it this morning. It was a Christmas song, and they weren't going to be here for Christmas, so they wanted to do it ahead. There was a link in the text to watch a music video on YouTube that had the lyrics and was the song. And the name of the song, and they will be singing it at the end of the service, is Make Room. And immediately, the obvious story from the Bible popped into my head. But immediately, I also had an inspiration of another story from the Bible. So there will be two different stories we're going to be contrasting this morning. And the reality is that that text answered a prayer I had had first thing Saturday morning, because I knew obviously I was a little over a week from having a sermon and I had no inspiration. So my prayer was, today I need you to give me something. And that evening the prayer was answered. The first story, like I said, is a very obvious one, with it being a Christmas song, it being the Christmas season, the song talking about making room. I think we can all kind of guess where I'm going. It'll be in Luke 2, the first 7 verses. And it is such a familiar passage, I bet there are probably some here who could basically recite it. But let's go ahead and read it together. It is in Luke chapter 2, again, the first 7 verses. Bless you. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 2 in Luke. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus, that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Typically, when we read this story, there is a central character that we focus on. We're not going to this morning. I want to focus on a different character this morning. To be perfectly honest, this isn't really a Christmas message, even though we read the Christmas story. It's not about the birth of Christ. I want to talk about the innkeeper this morning. You see, I love history, absolutely love history. And I know a little bit about the Roman Empire, and one of the things they were famous for doing was, as they conquered places, they wouldn't try to change the entire culture of the place. They would allow people to live basically their everyday lives almost the same as they had before the Romans took over. This was in order to quell any rebellions. If life felt the same, you didn't feel the need to overthrow your new overlords. And that is the reason that I see in the history lessons of this taxing and of the census that was taken, the way it was done. You see, in Jewish culture, taxations and tithing was typically done right after the harvest in the fall. So most historians believe that this decree would have gone out around the time of the harvest, and that the taxation would have occurred then in the fall when the harvest was done, in order to fit the local culture, in order to also make sure that everyone had the funds because now the harvest has been sold. In addition, this census was done in a way that the Jews would have accepted it, in a way the Jews would have done it had they done it themselves. Because you see, Jewish culture is very patriarchal. Their entire lineages are always traced through the father. So for them to have to return to their patriarchal ancestral home would have made sense. It would have felt familiar. It would have felt comfortable for them. So that's what Rome did. And that's where we get to this part of the story. So we can all fairly assume that they were all given a timeline in which to do this. There was advance notice given because people were coming from all over Israel back to wherever their fathers and grandfathers, great-grandfathers, however far back they traced it, came from. Nazareth is over a day's journey from Bethlehem. I looked it up on Google Maps, and if you take the sidewalks and the roads that exist today, they say it would take 1 day to make that trip. But if you go back 2,000 years ago to much rougher roads, passing up and down mountains that have since been either flattened or the valleys filled in to create leveler roads, it would have taken much longer. They also had the instance of Mary was pregnant, so I'm sure they couldn't travel as fast as others. So time was given by Rome to accomplish this task. That brings us to the innkeeper. The innkeeper, having had time to prepare in this small town of Bethlehem, where, frankly, he may have been the only innkeeper. This town was so small that there may not have been more than 1 or 2 inns there. So he had to plan for a large influx of people. So I'm sure he probably did what he needed to, cleared out a couple closets and threw some cots in them to create extra rooms, maybe a fresh coat of paint. Maybe some of the beds that he had, he turned into bunk beds to create extra levels for more people to fit in the inn. He did all this to prepare for this census as people were coming to Bethlehem. And then the knock at the door came. You see, because of the pregnancy, I'm sure it took Mary and Joseph longer to get there than everyone else. They were the last ones to arrive, it sounds like. And he had no rooms left. All his preparation, all that he had done, and he still ran short of rooms. And I don't know whether it was compassion or capitalism that allowed him to decide they can stay in the barn. I hope it was compassion that he saw a pregnant woman standing on his doorstep and he said, "I can't let you sleep on the street." But I don't know. So the innkeeper made room. He made room for Christ. He made room for Mary and Joseph. I imagine he moved some animals around to create an empty stall, despite the fact that the barn was probably full from everyone else's animals from traveling there. Put down some fresh hay, cleared out whatever animals' hay had been in there. Made a fresh load of hay in the manger for the baby. He prepared, he made room. But the reality is he was only an innkeeper. This was never meant to be a permanent arrangement. He wasn't creating a space for Mary and Joseph to live. He was renting them a stall in his barn for the night, maybe for a couple days. There was always meant to be a checkout time, just like any other hotel. He made room, but he didn't make a permanent space. He didn't invite them to move in. At the beginning of the sermon, I asked, are you an innkeeper or are you a remodeler? So that brings me to the second story, one that I'm sure none of you probably thought of in relation to the Christmas story that I just read, but it was the one that came to mind when I heard the title of the song, Make Room. We'll find it in 2 Kings 4, verses 8 through 11. And once again, this is a familiar story. I'm sure most of us have heard it before, most of us know it. And it also has to do with making room. Again, it's in 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 8 through 11. And it fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem, where was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And so it was that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. And she said unto her husband, Behold now, I perceive that this is a man, an holy man of God, which passeth by us continually. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed and a candle and a stool and a candlestick. And a table and a stool and a candlestick. And it shall be when he cometh to us that he shall turn in thither. And it fell on a day that he came thither, and he turned into the chamber and lay there. So we see this Shunammite woman did differently than the innkeeper. They both made room. But the Shunammite woman went so much further. She got out tools and she remodeled. It almost sounds like they even built this room on top of the wall. They created a special space for Elisha. They furnished it, and then they invited him to move in. This wasn't like staying at a hotel. This wasn't a temporary arrangement where you pay us for the night's stay and then make sure you're out by noon. This was a permanent thing. It says that he continually passed by them. He passed through Shunem all the time. This was now his home away from home. This was where he lived while on the road. So we see a difference here between innkeepers and remodelers. We see a difference here between the host of Joseph and Mary and the host of Elisha. And my question for myself and for you is, which one are you? As we enter the Christmas season, and I know I said it wasn't a Christmas message, but it is the Christmas season, so do we make room now? Are we finding space? Are we moving boxes aside? Are we brushing away some hay to create a space for Jesus now because, well, it's that time of year? Are we making room like an innkeeper? Is it a temporary space, but you know what? Just remember, you got to be out by January 1st. Are we simply dusting off the box that he normally sits on in December? Or have we created a special place for him, invited him to live with us, furnished it, made it comfortable for him, made sure that there weren't other things there detracting from his living there? You know, with hotels, there's always that lovely little thing of a checkout time where they tell you if you don't check out by, typically it's noon or 1 o'clock, they're going to charge you for an extra night. Even if you're only there till 2 o'clock, you get to pay for an extra night that you're not ever going to use the room. Do we have a checkout time for Christ? Is there a moment where we say, you know what, it's been long enough, but it's time for you to hit the road? Or do we invite him to live with us? Do we invite him to permanently stay? And even if we do, is that it? Are we done there? Is the job of a remodeler done once someone has moved into that room? You know, I own a house, and I have to say, honestly, the remodeling work, the housekeeping and all of that, it never ends. Just this last week, I had to fix a couple door jambs because doors wouldn't latch anymore. It never ends. There's constantly projects for me to do at my house. Even this last week, as I did some fun things with the girls. This past week, we had a contest at the girls' school. They went around the neighborhood around the school, and they hid 12 paper gingerbread men. They laminated them, thankfully, because it did rain this week, but they're all about that big. And they hid them in people's front yards. And our job was to drive around the neighborhood and find as many of them as we could and write down the address of the home they were in front of. And by, I think it's tomorrow, we have to turn in the list of the ones we found, and whoever found the most gets a prize. What does this have to do with remodeling and innkeeping? It's what I noticed while we were driving around the neighborhood that has everything to do with it. You see, as I drove around the neighborhood, I noticed something. I had to drive very carefully down the very middle of the road because of the number of cars parked on either side of the road, the number of cars parked in driveways. And in noticing that, I kind of wondered, why are there so many cars? We're in the middle of a pandemic. Nobody's supposed to be traveling. They can't have family here. Maybe they can. But as I drove through the neighborhood, I noticed a few garage doors were open, and the curiosity got the better of me, and I started peeking in people's garages. And I noticed something. The houses that had the cars parked in the driveway and on the street, there was other stuff in the garage. One house specifically I noticed, because the stuff in there kind of stood out to me. There were boxes like you'd expect, but there were also large piles of Halloween decorations. They must have just taken them down a few weeks before Thanksgiving, since it was Halloween then, and they just piled them up in the garage. There was a folding table with some half-finished project of some sort strewn all over it. There was a dirt bike in the garage that was up on a jack, and the front wheel was off. The engine looked like it had been partially taken apart, and the pieces were strewn across the garage. But there was definitely no room for a car. Now, I'm not saying if you have so much in your garage that you can't park in it, that's a bad thing. I'm only a few boxes away from possibly having to do that myself. But it made me wonder, am I doing that with my heart? This space that was created for Jesus. Just like the garage, our garages were created to house our cars. And over time, they start housing everything else. Are we doing that? Am I doing that in my heart? Am I filling up that space that was reserved, that was created for Christ, that I invited him into, that I remodeled, that I cleared out, that I built, painted, furnished for him with other things? Is there even room for him anymore? You see, the job of the remodeler is never done. We constantly are having to go back into that room and find, I didn't know that was even here. I've been looking for that for 6 months. We constantly are having to go back in there and clear it out and make sure that it is able to house who it was created to house. You know, as I look at my life, I kind of realize sometimes that, I am filling up my heart with all kinds of other things. I mean, some of them are noble. I hold my daughters there, my wife, my church family, my parents. Those are all noble things. They belong in my heart. But maybe, just maybe, the Phoenix Suns are in there too. Maybe that's not quite as appropriate. The Arizona Cardinals. I'm a big sports fan. I'm pretty sure I have a large painting of the current team of the Suns in there. I can name every single one of them. And they only just signed some new players a couple weeks ago. And I already know who they are, where they played before, their numbers, their stats from last year. Am I holding all of that information in my heart? Am I filling up the space for Christ with that? And how comfortable can he be if I'm shoving all these boxes in there? As the remodeler, as the owner of that room, sort of, my job is never done in making it ready for Christ. Every day, every moment of every day, I need to guard against turning that room back into a closet where I shove all my dark secrets, where I put all my favorite things, where I put things I'm not using anymore, whatever. Every day I need to remember that I need to never stop making room for Christ. Because that is the place he is supposed to be. It was made for him. So my prayer is that all of us will never stop making room. Now I'd like to invite the group up to sing the song, Make Room.
The family hiding from the storm found a place that could keep restored. It was for this the child was born to save a world so cold and hollow. to write His story. You can come as you are, but it may set you apart. Then you make room in your heart and trade your dreams for His glory. Make room in your heart. Make room in your heart. Mother holds the promise tight. Every wrong will be made right. The road is straight, the burden's light. For in His hands He holds tomorrow. Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart for God to write His story? You can come as you are, but it may set you apart. Then you make room in your heart and trade your dreams for His glory. Make room in your heart. Make room in your heart. Make room in your heart. Make room in your heart.